Welcome to the Quiverful Adoptions podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Elizabeth.
And I'm Casey. We are two adoptive mamas who have walked in your shoes, so we get it.
We remember the crazy journey of adoption like it was yesterday, and we are so thankful we get to share some amazing stories with you right here from the living room of our office.
Well, actually, we're sitting in the bathroom, but the living room does sound better.
Anyway, none of that matters. We're glad you're here.
So grab a cup of coffee and join us as we dive right in.
Hey guys!
Hey friends!
We are so excited about today's podcast. We can't wait to introduce you to one of our new favorite Instagram accounts to follow.
Yeah, it's at adoption.books.
We love it because I have a toddler and a 4-year-old, and we love reading books. And as an adoptive parent, we are always looking for how to introduce books into our kids' lives about their story and about adoption. And so we have the pleasure to talk to Lanaya today. Tell us a little bit about her, Casey.
Lanaya and her husband have the privilege of parenting two beautiful girls who joined their family through international adoption. Adoption makes their family a whole lot more beautiful and brings unique challenges to the table. This has driven her in her pursuit of adoption education, particularly from adoptee and birth parent voices, which she seeks to elevate in the adoption community. Through her blog and book reviews on Instagram at adoption.books, Lanaya shares her love of books as tools for creating dialogue about the complexities of adoption. She believes passionately in the value of every human life and the incredible grace of God. She and her family live in Alberta, Canada. Give me your favorite Canadian accent, Elizabeth. Okay, that was a dud. Connect with Lanaya on Instagram at lanaya.graham and through her blog found at www.lanayagraham.com.
Okay, Casey, give me your best Canadian accent.
Oh, that's just a bunch of rubbish.
Y'all, stay tuned. It's going to get better, I promise.
Hey, friends.
Hey, guys. Today we have Lanaya with us from Adoption Books. Lanaya, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Lanaya, why don't you start out just by sharing with our listeners a little bit about who you are and a little bit about your Instagram profile.
Many years ago, I guess not many, but in 2009, my husband and I started changing a lot of different things about our lives. And one of those things was just that we decided, we've been talking about adoption, but maybe we need to get serious and actually decide if this is how we want to form our family. And so we decided to start pursuing international adoption at that point and brought our little girl home in 2012, at the very end of 2012, and then just kept the learning process. Before she came home, we had read books and been to classes and that type of thing. And after she came home, even more so, just getting excited about learning and growing as parents. And then a friend of mine suggested a Facebook group on transracial adoption. And it was a group that really had a lot of adoptees in it, birth parents, that type of thing. And it kind of showed me that I'd only been scratching the surface of what I needed to learn in order to parent my children well. And I'm a really intense person, so I just started delving deep into all of that stuff, just really, really learning. And so I got into lots of books, and over the last couple of years, been really looking for more and more books because I'm kind of finding the ones that are common and realizing there's not really much out there to figure out which books to read. And so the more I saw that no one was offering it, I thought, why don't I do these reviews of all the books I've been reading? So that's how I began.
That's awesome. So Lanaya, I'm sure that you have seen a lot of good books and bad books over the course of the last year. How long have you been doing adoption.books?
How long have I been doing the reviews?
Yes.
I just started in August.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And I'm sure over the course of the last few months, you've read a lot of good books and bad books.
Yes.
Do you ever feel bad about writing reviews for the bad ones?
Oh, yes. I wrote one just this last week that I I mean, so many of them I agonize over. I really think really hard about what I'm saying because I know that people really do pour their heart and soul into these books. Especially these self-published books. People are really putting something out there that they really believe in. And so it is hard when I have negative things that I think about books. So, yeah.
Yeah, you probably try to do like a crap sandwich where you give them one positive piece and then a negative piece. And then...
Yeah. And there have been books that I've seen that I'm like, I am not ready to review this. I don't even know what to say.
Right.
Yeah. Well, okay, so you adopted internationally.
Yes.
2 girls, right?
Yes.
Where from?
So our oldest daughter, Lucy, she is born in Florida. We live in Canada. So she's adopted internationally. She's born in Florida. And our second daughter was born in Taiwan.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, why are adoption-themed books important for kids, adoptees?
So to me, there are several different reasons why it's really important for kids to have books about adoption. I think that adoption isn't normal. It's not the ideal. In a perfect world, adoption wouldn't exist. But our kids need to know that it's okay and there's people like them and they need it normalized in their life, even though it's not normal. Another really important thing to me is that kids need windows and mirrors on their bookshelf, which really just means they need books that are reflections of their life and themselves. And they also need windows into people's lives that are really different from them. That's how we develop empathy. I also believe that although books are not the only tools that you use to talk to your children about adoption, they are awesome tools. They're vehicles by which your family can discuss the complexity of adoption. So I think they can be such amazing resources for families to read a book and let's discuss it and let's have questions about how is this similar to your story? How is this different from your story? I think also really good books can give your child voice. They can help your child process their thoughts on adoption and give them the vocabulary they might need to discuss various aspects of their life and their story.
That's so important.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that in our family, books have been one of the best tools to kind of start conversations. We talk about adoption all the time, but when you sit down with your kids and pick up a book, you read a page and they might look at you and ask you a question, or you might look at them and say, do you ever think maybe your birth mom thinks about this? And it just opens the conversation.
Now, not every part of the book will relate to a child's story. So what are some practical ways that the parent can interact with their child or children throughout the book? I know, like you mentioned just a few minutes ago about, saying like, how is this different than your story? That kind of thing. Do you have any other practical suggestions?
Well, that's a great question. To me, when I sit down and read a book with my kids, it's important that the book doesn't just give explanations, but it kind of opens dialogue. So, for example, I want to read a book that just isn't stating facts about adoption or facts about, this is why adoption is awesome, but really that bring up complex topics. The better a book is, the more complex it's going to be. And so I want to read a book that says, sometimes I'm sad when I think about my birth family. And then I can look to my kids and say, do you ever feel sad when you talk to them? Because the truth is, sometimes they're not going to feel sad, but sometimes they are. And if they're never allowed to be sad, or they're never allowed to have questions or have doubts or wish they weren't in our family and were in someone else's, then it's hard to keep that dialogue open. It's hard to keep talking about it if it's never allowed, if that makes sense.
So how can we determine if a book is helpful or hurtful in a child's understanding of what their adoption means?
Okay. To me, a book that is really good is a book that is focused on the child. So in my reading in children's books, I have found a lot of books are from an adoptive parent perspective. They're AP-centric, AP meaning adoptive parent, instead of child-centric. And to me, a book needs to be focused on the child and their needs and their thoughts and feelings. It doesn't mean that we don't also discuss the thoughts and feelings and emotions of adults. I think it's really important that kids are validated in their really deep, their place in our families. That, it's not lackadaisical. We really care that our kids are in our families. They need to know how much we desired them to be in our family, how much we did what it took to help them join our family. But at the same time, if that's all the book is talking about, that doesn't leave room for the child to feel sad that they had to be in our family. Or it doesn't leave room for the fact that the biological family is missing out on having this child in their family. So I think the book needs to be child focused. I think the books also need to be showing stories that are similar to my kids. So my kids need to see books that have girls that look like them, girls whose families look like theirs, but they also need to see books where the kids don't look like them. They need to know that not all adoptees are transracial adoptees, for example. They need to know that not all adoptees have open adoptions or not all adoptees have closed adoptions, that type of thing. To me, that's good. It gives a really broad picture of adoption instead of giving us this very, very narrow picture with pat answers and simple explanations.
Right. I think that with some books, though, especially a children's story where it's, probably 10 to 20 pages, it's really short and one sentence on each page, it's really hard and complex to include every single detail like that into the book. Would you agree?
For sure.
Okay. So it's not necessarily that it's a bad book if it doesn't include all of those things, but it would be a better book if it did include all of those things.
Right. That makes sense, because you're right. Lots of kids' books are very simple. They're concise, they're whimsical, they rhyme. And I do find sometimes that with adoption books, they can be really simple. I have a great book. It's called Frankie and Friends Talk Adoption. It's very short. It doesn't actually have a lot of storyline. It really is a book of questions. And so you're right. It doesn't have to have a lot of words to be complex.
Right.
But I do find that sometimes when a book is, say, for example, a rhyme, that instead of speaking intelligently and deeply about adoption, they oversimplify adoption because of the commitment to the rhyme and cadence rather than to really great adoption truth. Yeah. So when we use really kind of cliche phrases, sometimes that just perpetuates, stereotypes instead of saying adoption is really big and complicated. And we don't need to say that all on this page, but we can leave room for some of those other thoughts, I guess.
Your story matters. Creating your adoption profile book is one of the most important aspects of your adoption journey. It is the first and usually only opportunity for you to share your story with a potential expectant family, and Arrow and Root is here to help make that process as easy as possible. Having a professionally designed profile book that is expectant parent focused will help you stand out and bring you comfort in knowing your book communicates who you are as a family in the best way possible. Allow Arrow and Root to help you make a great and lasting first impression. It means everything. What are your thoughts on this? So, a book that you read to your 2-year-old may not be the same book that you're going to be reading when your child is 7, because your 2-year-old obviously can't comprehend all parts of the adoption story or the more complicated parts. So the way that I kind of think of it is, whenever we're teaching our children about Jesus, we're teaching them about Jesus on their level. So, a 2-year-old doesn't understand the entire gospel. Heck, I don't even understand the entire gospel. But you're teaching them on their level so that they are getting glimpses of adoption and they're being around adoption language exposed. Mm-hmm. But a book that I'm reading to my 7-year-old may not be comprehensible to the 2-year-old or even on their level, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Yep, I get what you're saying.
So it's hard.
I think that you're right. It is hard. And I think, I mean, my kids are still only 5 and 6, and so I don't imagine it gets much easier. But I think some of the books, I'm trying to think of books that I've had for a long time and the books that I've been reading to my kids since they were 2. And some of them have the exact same words, but our conversations are deeper around them. Mm-hmm. And so I think that my kids can enjoy a lot of these books through a lot of different ages, and where they're at in their story and what they're processing about their relationship with their first family definitely comes into play when we read it again and discuss it. So one book, for example, that's really simple is called Mother Bridge of Love. And it is a poem, even though I said sometimes poems are tricky, but it is a poem about kind of a young adoptee and her two mothers, and how those moms both have roles in her life. And so reading it with your 2-year-old is really sweet and cute. And also reading it with your 7-year-old is sweet and brings up more discussion about these roles might not be as simple as it looks like in the picture, but the book is still just as enjoyable for a 2-year-old because it is really sweet. It's also complicated.
At the end of the day, it's our job as the adoptive parents to open that conversation further. So if the book doesn't go into enough detail, it's our job as mom and dad to say, like, ask those deeper questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. Like, books are tools. They are not the be all end all. My kids, we can't find the perfect books that are just going to be like, okay, I'll read these books. They'll tell my kids all the things they need to know about adoption. You're right. It's totally our job.
But we're also entrusted to make sure we're not giving them incorrect information.
Right. Yes.
Absolutely. Yes. And there are some books that I do find very harmful. And like I said, like you were saying, earlier, some that I'm like, I don't even know how to review this because I just feel like it's so hurtful. And so, yeah, there's absolutely things in kids' books that I've read that I just feel like, ooh, this language is really commodifying, or this language is really pushing towards saviorism and that type of thing. And so, yeah, I really do try and think, if I don't correct this language and my child hears it over and over as we read this book, how does this translate into how they perceive adoption, what they think they're allowed to say or believe about adoption? How does this play into their faith? How does these explanations of adoption play into what they believe about God?
What is one thing that you have learned through reading all of the books that you think every family needs to know?
I think that every family needs to know that their kid's story is not necessarily going to look like any book or any other kid. And the most important thing when we read these books is to talk to our kids about adoption. My two girls have very different stories. They have very different thoughts and feelings about adoption, about their histories, about their biological families. And that's okay. We try and leave so much room in our home for however it feels. It's so important that these books do not become the rules about adoption. They, as adoptees, are able to define their own stories, and as Christians, define their stories through the lens of Jesus.
Absolutely.
So we already asked the question about kind of what led you to create adoption.books. Are you planning to write a book one day?
Oh, that's so fun. I have had lots of people ask me that or say, like, "Ooh, when's your book coming out?" I sometimes think about it, and the more I think about it, I think I just need to not worry about it. And if it comes one day, it comes. The other day with one of my girls, we were just, sitting around, and she asked me to tell her a story. So I just started telling a story, and I just started telling a story about her, kind of, but with fake characters. And I thought this would be so cool one day if we can write this together and they can each write their own story. I think that adoptees sharing their stories is so powerful. And adoption isn't about me. It's not about my needs being met. It's not about, me being the hero of the story, because I am not the hero of any stories. But my kids are awesome and incredible little girls who will grow up and be adults and have these really cool stories that I hope they are excited to share however they feel is appropriate for them.
I love that.
We get a lot of families who ask when is an appropriate time to begin sharing. And so that's one of the reasons why I love your account, because it helps us point them to a place where they can find resources for how to begin those early conversations. I know you agree that these conversations need to be done early as opposed to later in a child's life. And how do you feel you incorporate that, through the books, but also in other ways of life?
How we incorporate talking about their adoptions?
Yes.
Well, both of our kids are transracial adoptees. So it is fairly obvious that they are not biologically related to us.
Mm-hmm.
However, we pray for their first families every day. We are eating spaghetti and I say, hey, do you do you think maybe your birth mom liked to eat spaghetti? We should ask her. Or, we'll be out skating and I'll say, oh, did you know that when your mom was little, she loved to skate? And so I think just a lot of those little things of making sure that we celebrate those people and making sure that talking about adoption is always, always on the table. I'm bringing it up. I'm not waiting for them to bring it up. Anne Heffron had an awesome post a while back that just said, waiting for our kids to talk about their own adoption stories is like waiting for them to talk about their genitals. They won't know they can unless we're the ones initiating that.
Who was it that said that?
Anne Heffron. She is an adoptee who has written a book and has an awesome Instagram account. Totally recommend following it. It always is bringing up complexities in her own adoption experience, and we can learn from it. My husband and I are constantly, we talk about their birth families, their birthplaces. We also are really passionate about planning our lives around visiting their birthplaces. I know that this is a big financial challenge for a lot of people, especially with international adoption, and we are incredibly blessed that we have been able to do this financially. But for us, when we sit down and plan where we're going to spend our money, that's a huge priority for us. And so I have talked to adoptive parents who feel like they want to wait until their kids are older and they get more out of it. But for us, a trip to visit their birthplace and potentially their birth families is not about waiting until they get the most out of it. It's doing these things consistently, so it's never this huge event that's, terrifying because I haven't been back in 30 years and now I'm doing it on my own. We want these things to be things we do with them and support them in this story that we are so privileged to be part of.
That's so good. Well, Lanaya, before you leave, tell our followers how they can find you on Instagram.
So you can find me on Instagram at adoption.books, where I discuss both foster care themed books and adoption themed books for kids, for parents, parenting books, and also things like memoirs and biographies from specifically adoptees. I'm also on my blog at lanayagraham.com. I do have the mini reviews on there, and also just some of my thoughts as I ramble on faith, on life, on adoption, and just how I'm growing.
We'll put your contact information in the show notes so that people can easily find it. Real quick before we go, tell everybody your favorite children's book that you think that they should go out and buy right now.
Ooh, my favorite. That's so hard. Okay. I would say if I think you should go out and buy any book right now, go buy Growing Grace by Erin Mason. It is written by a birth mom about her experience of learning that she was pregnant, how she chose a family, and how she dealt with her emotions through her pregnancy.
Love that. That's a really good book. We have it on our coffee table in the office.
Yeah.
It's great.
I honestly do think it is for every single adoptive family, whether or not you know your child's birth family or not. It's beautiful, and again, creates dialogue about maybe this isn't exactly like your birth mom's story, but what do you think maybe would have been going through her mind, or how do you think she chose what to do?
Right. That's good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Lanaya, for being on the podcast. We've really enjoyed having you.
Thank you so much.
Have you heard about the Promise Summit? If you are out there and you're listening right now and you are hoping to adopt, or you're an adoptive parent, or you are struggling with infertility, or maybe you feel called to adoption and you just have no clue where to start, then you need to be at the Promise Summit. Casey, tell us a little bit about what the Promise Summit is.
The Promise Summit is a Christian conference for couples considering adoption, in the wait of adoption, and or families who have adopted. This event is packed with powerful speakers, incredible worship, and a panel that represents all members of the adoption triad, and is sure to be a weekend that you will never forget. Our hope is that you leave the Promise Summit forever changed and armed with the promises from God that will encourage you throughout your entire adoption journey.
The Promise Summit will be held May 3rd and 4th in Greenville, South Carolina, and we would love to meet you there. You can find out more information at thepromisesummit.com or on Instagram at thepromisesummit.